had been scrolling through my phone, half-heartedly tapping at emails and ignoring the pile of dishes in the sink. When I heard it, Emily, we're having people over tonight, I froze mid-scroll. Wait, what? I asked, looking up at my husband, Jake, who was casually sipping his coffee as if he hadn't just dropped the social equivalent of a bomb. In my lap, you know, he said, smiling that infuriating grin. My friend's dinner tonight. My heart skipped a beat. Dinner? Tonight, and I was supposed to cook. I hadn't cooked a proper meal in months. The thought of spending 2 hours in the kitchen, chopping, stirring, sweating over a hot stove, made me want to crawl under the table and hide. Jake, I began, my voice shaking slightly. I didn't plan for this. I literally have nothing ready. Nothing? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Emily, you're not seriously going to serve takeout to my friends, are you? I opened my mouth to argue, but no words came. Takeout, that was my plan. But the idea of everyone's judgmental eyes, of the soft coughs and polite HMM, as they pretended to enjoy rubbery pizza or soggy Chinese food, made my stomach churn. You've got 2 hours, Jake said, smirking. And I mean it. Be creative. I watched him walk away, his confident stride echoing in the hallway. 2 hours. 2 hours to transform my complete culinary laziness into something edible. My palms were sweating, my mind racing. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a trial by fire. And somehow, I was the one who had to survive it. I opened the fridge and stared inside like it was some alien portal. Leftover vegetables from last week, a suspiciously old carton of milk, and a block of cheese that had definitely seen better days. Nothing was organized, nothing was inviting. Panic settled over me like a wet blanket. Okay, I muttered to myself. You can do this, you're a grown woman. Ugh. I grabbed a cutting board and a knife, wishing I had paid attention to those cooking videos I swore I'd watch. I chopped half-heartedly, trying to channel some semblance of competence. Smoke started curling from the pan. I cursed under my breath. By the time Jake's friends arrived, the kitchen looked like a tornado had passed through. Burnt vegetables, flour scattered across the counter, and a pan with something that probably should not have been eaten. Emily. Jake's voice echoed from the living room. Dinners. He froze mid-sentence when he saw my panicked face and the chaos around me. I stammered. Hi? I hope you like creativity? Jake's friends looked from me to the stove, eyebrows raised. There were polite chuckles, but I could feel the judgment radiating off them. My cheeks burned and I wanted to disappear entirely. Then Jake did something I never expected. He stepped in front of me, casually brushing off a bit of flour from my shirt. Hey, it's fine. Emily's got this, one of his friends laughed nervously. Looks great. Jake smiled at me, eyes warm. Really, don't worry. It's the effort that counts. My heart caught in my throat. The embarrassment was still there, yes, but his support was a lifeline. He wasn't criticizing me. He wasn't yelling. He was defending me. And in that moment, despite the smoke-filled kitchen and burnt food, I realized something important. True love wasn't about perfection. It was about partnership, effort, and maybe, just maybe, a little chaos could be forgiven. But little did I know, this dinner, this disaster of a night, would change everything between us. The smell hit me before the laughter did. Smoke, sharp and acrid, curling through the kitchen and sneaking into the living room. I cursed under my breath, waving my hand in front of my face like I could push it away. Jake's friends had already arrived, filling our living room with that casual energy that comes with people who think they're too sophisticated to notice the small disasters of life except, of course, they did notice. Emily? One of them called, peeking into the smoke-filled kitchen. Smells interesting in here. I forced a shaky smile, nodding as if smoke and burnt smells were exactly what I'd planned. Yeah, interesting, I repeated, more to convince myself than anyone else. I dropped the spatula with a clatter and cursed again. The vegetables I'd thought were under control had turned black, crisped at the edges. The pasta was sticking together in a gooey, unappetizing mass. Even the salad, simple, innocent lettuce and tomatoes, looked like something from a horror movie. Jake appeared behind me, hand resting lightly on my shoulder. Hey, he said quietly, almost in a whisper. It's okay, just breathe. I nodded, but my heart was hammering. Every minute that ticked by made me feel smaller, more exposed, like a child caught in the act of ruining something they didn't even want to touch in the first place. Maybe we should just order pizza? One of his friends suggested, leaning casually against the counter. Jake shook his head, smiling softly at me. Nah, Emily's got this. Trust me. I wanted to crawl under the counter. Trust him, I muttered to myself, but the words sounded hollow even in my own ears. I set the pan down and tried to salvage what I could. I scraped the blackened edges, plated the food with as much dignity as possible, and carried it out to the table. The living room had transformed into a scene of polite socializing. Jake's friends were chatting about work, sports, and random weekend plans. They didn't even glance at me as I walked in, but the second I set the plates down, a hush fell over the table. "Oh," one of them said, hesitating. Dinner looks interesting." Jake gave me a reassuring nod. "It's fine." Emily made it herself. I forced a smile, trying to hide the panic bubbling beneath my skin. My hands trembled as I grabbed a fork, and I knew the food was going to taste like ash. Overcooked vegetables and despair. The first bite was worse than I imagined. I tried not to gag, chewing slowly and forcing myself to swallow. The polite murmurs of and interesting flavor grated against my nerves. I could see the flickers of confusion and suppressed judgment in their eyes, and then, as if on cue, disaster struck. The pasta, my so-called masterpiece, slipped off the plate and onto the floor with a dramatic splat. My cheeks burned hotter than the oven had ever been. I bent down to pick it up, muttering apologies, while Jake's friends exchanged awkward glances. "Emily, it's fine," Jake said, his voice carrying that calm reassurance that I couldn't match. "Really, don't worry about it." I wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear. I could feel their eyes on me, judging, and my frustration bubbled up like lava. How could they be so casual, so normal, while I'm on the verge of a breakdown? Then I felt it, a spark, faint at first, but growing stronger. A tiny voice in my head whispered, "They think you're a disaster? Fine, just watch. You'll show them. You'll show him." It wasn't about proving them wrong in the moment. That would have been impossible. No, this was bigger. This was about making them and Jake see the real me, the one they hadn't taken seriously. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to stop shaking. I pushed the embarrassment aside and started cleaning up, silently planning. Every dropped fork, every overcooked vegetable, every awkward laugh was a reminder. By the time dessert or whatever sugar substitute I could scrape together was served, I had made a decision. This wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. Jake caught my eye from across the table. He smiled, that same warm, supportive smile. And even though I was still mortified, I knew one thing: he believed in me. Even when I couldn't believe in myself, and that was going to be my secret weapon. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know when. But someday they would see. The judgmental stares, the quiet whispers, the polite laughter at my expense, they would all come back. Only next time, I wouldn't be trembling in the kitchen. Next time, I would be in control. The night ended with laughter, scattered compliments, and the faint aroma of burnt vegetables lingering in the air. Once the door clicked shut behind Jake's friends, the silence in the apartment was almost deafening. I sank onto the couch, exhaustion weighing down every part of me. My hands were still trembling from the chaos, my stomach twisted with embarrassment. But there was also something else. A quiet, simmering determination that I hadn't noticed before. Jake flopped beside me, draping an arm around my shoulders. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle, not a trace of judgment anywhere. I nodded, biting back a tired laugh. "I'm alive," I muttered. "You survived dinner," he said with a grin, "so I'd call that a win." I stared at him, incredulous. "A win, Jake? My pasta is still on the ceiling. The salad looked like it went through a fire. And your friends probably think I don't even know. A disaster." Jake shook his head, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Emily, I don't care about the food. I care about you. And you handled it. Smoke, chaos, awkward social interactions. You didn't run. You didn't hide. That counts for more than a perfectly cooked meal." I wanted to smile, and part of me did. But there was a small, stubborn spark of anger still burning inside me. Not at Jake, he was wonderful, but at the world that had made me feel small, inadequate, and humiliated. I realized then that if I was ever going to feel in control again, I had to do something. Not just for the kitchen disasters, but for every time I had been underestimated, dismissed, or laughed at. And that's when the idea came to me. I would show them. I would show him. Not by proving I could cook perfectly, but by proving I was more capable, clever, and unstoppable than anyone had ever imagined. The next morning, I woke with a new sense of purpose. Breakfast was skipped. My mind was already racing ahead, planning. I didn't need a recipe, a tutorial, or even a Pinterest board. I needed strategy, timing, and a little flair. I started small, cleaning the apartment meticulously, taking notes on what Jake's friends liked and disliked, observing the subtle dynamics I had missed during the disaster dinner. I paid attention to conversations, reactions, everything. Every laugh, every compliment, every eye roll, they were clues. Pieces of the puzzle I was going to solve. And while I was doing all this, I kept up appearances. A smile here, a casual laugh there, like nothing had happened. Jake noticed, of course, but he didn't ask questions. He didn't have to. He just trusted me, and that trust was intoxicating. One evening, while Jake was at work, I pulled out my notebook. I had started keeping a journal, not a diary of feelings. but a tactical log. Lesson 1, I wrote, never let them see you sweat. Lesson 2, appear weak. Strike smart. The words felt powerful on the page. They weren't about hurting anyone physically or emotionally, they were about reclaiming my dignity, my space, and my voice. As the week passed, I noticed changes in myself. My confidence was growing, subtle but undeniable. I walked taller, spoke louder, and smiled more genuinely. I even experimented with cooking, not for anyone else, but for me. Burnt pasta turned into unevenly cooked but delicious stir fries. A chaotic kitchen became my laboratory, a place where mistakes were experiments. And embarrassment was fuel. Jake noticed, of course. He would peek into the kitchen, watching me with admiration in his eyes. You've changed, he said one evening. I'm learning, I replied, and it was true. I was learning more than cooking. I was learning resilience, cunning, patience, and the satisfaction of small victories. And somewhere in the back of my mind, the thought of that disastrous dinner and the judgments I had endured was no longer painful. It was a challenge, a dare. And I was going to accept it. The twist in all of this was simple. They thought I was helpless, lazy, incompetent. But by the time I was finished with my little plan, they would realize that underestimating me was their biggest mistake. Little did Jake's friends know. The next dinner, yes, the next dinner would be nothing like the disaster that had humiliated me. This time, I would be in control. I would dictate the terms. And the satisfaction of watching them try to process my transformation? That would be sweet. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, power. Not the kind that comes from anger, but the kind that comes from knowing your own worth and knowing the world has underestimated you. And that, I realized, was going to be my weapon. The weeks after the first disastrous dinner passed in a blur of planning, practice, and observation. I had cooked every night, not perfect meals, but controlled chaos. I experimented with flavors, textures, and timing. Every burnt attempt became a lesson, every mistake a stepping stone. Jake noticed the change immediately. He would peek into the kitchen, leaning casually against the doorway, a grin on his face as he watched me orchestrate my culinary experiments. Like a conductor leading an orchestra. You're on fire tonight, he said one evening as I chopped vegetables with precision. Tossing them into a sizzling pan, I smiled, but inside, the fire wasn't just about the food. It was about the plan. The ultimate dinner was coming this time, the one where I would show everyone, including Jake, exactly who I was. I set the date for the comeback dinner carefully. I knew Jake had a work event on a Friday evening, and his friends were the kind to linger afterward with casual drinks and small talk. Perfect timing. I invited them under the pretense of a casual get-together, nothing fancy, nothing intimidating. But behind the scenes, I orchestrated everything with meticulous precision. I bought ingredients that would shine, planned dishes that would impress visually and flavor-wise, and even rehearsed timing so that everything would be served perfectly. I wasn't just cooking, I was staging a performance. When Jake left for work, I was already in the kitchen, the timer ticking, the pan sizzling, and the aromas beginning to fill the apartment. The air was thick with anticipation, mine, mostly, as I silently rehearsed the evening in my mind. When the doorbell rang, my heart jumped, but this time it wasn't panic. It was thrill. I opened the door to greet Jake's friends, smiling warmly, confident, calm. Hey guys, come on in, I said, my voice steady, inviting, commanding attention in the way I hadn't before. Their eyes widened slightly, the first hint of surprise flashing across their faces. This wasn't the Emily they remembered, the frazzled, burnt food disaster. This was someone entirely different. Someone in control. I led them to the living room, chatting casually about work, weekend plans, and life in general. I laughed when appropriate, nodded when needed, and all the while, I kept an eye on the kitchen. Timing was everything. Finally, the moment came. I carried out the first course, a colorful salad with homemade dressing, plated beautifully. The room fell silent for a brief moment as everyone took in the presentation. Wow. One of Jake's friends muttered, clearly impressed. Looks amazing, said another. I smiled. A quiet thrill coursing through me. The first hint of victory. Double quotes Emily, this smells incredible, Jake said over the phone. He had called to say he'd be home later. Unaware that tonight wasn't just a casual dinner, it was my moment. The meal progressed flawlessly. Each dish arrived with precision, each flavor tested and perfected over weeks of practice. I watched as Jake's friends ate, laughed, complimented, and relaxed into the atmosphere I had crafted. And then, I served the main course, a perfectly roasted chicken with a side of vegetables, caramelized to perfection. I watched their eyes widen, their forks pause midair. The surprise and admiration were palpable. I caught a glance at Jake's friend Mark, the one who had looked at me with subtle judgment during the first dinner. His eyebrows shot up, his expression a mixture of shock and respect. Emily, this is... Wow, he stammered. Yes, I said, calm and confident, letting the word hang in the air. Not a boast, not a plea, just the truth. I had earned this moment and I was claiming it fully. Dessert followed, a delicate chocolate so full, light and airy. The kind that melts in your mouth and leaves a lingering sense of satisfaction. The table was silent as they tasted it, except for murmurs of appreciation. And as I poured coffee and settled into my own chair, I felt it, the power of transformation. From the humiliated, panicked woman in a smoke-filled kitchen to the confident, commanding presence in a perfectly orchestrated dinner, I had flipped the script entirely. Jake arrived home later that night, entering a living room filled with laughter, chatter, and the warm glow of victory. He looked around, eyes landing on me, and smiled knowingly. I see you've been busy, he said, voice full of admiration. I replied, calm and confident, my heart racing with the thrill of success for the first time. I wasn't just Emily, I was Emily in control, Emily commanding respect, Emily transforming humiliation into triumph, and deep down, I knew one thing, they would never underestimate me again. The morning after the comeback dinner. The apartment was quiet. No smoke, no chaos, no burnt remnants of disaster. Just the faint aroma of coffee and the soft hum of the city outside. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping slowly, savoring the calm that followed the storm I had orchestrated. Jake walked in, stretching, clearly impressed by the calm and composed atmosphere. Morning, chef, he said with a teasing grin. I smiled, letting him think it was casual. Morning, I replied, calm and steady, my confidence radiating like the sunlight streaming through the window. Seriously, Emily, he continued, taking a seat across from me. Last night, I've never seen your friends react like that. You completely turned the tables. I shrugged lightly, pretending modesty. But inside, I felt a rush of satisfaction. This wasn't just about food, it was about perception, respect, and reclaiming control. As the day progressed, the messages started arriving. Texts from Jake's friends, casual check-ins, but with undertones of admiration and curiosity. Hey, Emily, last night was wow. Seriously impressive, Mark had texted. The same friend who had looked at me with quiet judgment during the first dinner. Another message popped up, not sure how you did it, but you totally crushed it. Dinner was amazing, I couldn't help but smile. They hadn't expected me to rise, to transform humiliation into triumph. And now, they were seeing me for who I really was, not the clumsy, awkward woman they had underestimated. The shift wasn't just external. Something inside me had changed too. The confidence, the strategic thinking, the calm control, it was addictive. I realized that revenge wasn't about punishment. It was about proving your worth, asserting your presence, and refusing to be diminished. Later that evening, Jake and I were sitting on the couch, the soft glow of the lamps creating a warm cocoon around us. You know, he said, leaning back, I knew you were capable, but I didn't realize how capable. I laughed softly, leaning against him. Thanks, I guess all it took was a little motivation. Jake shook his head, a soft smile playing on his lips. Not motivation. You found your fire. And trust me, it's impressive. I think I might be more intimidated than anyone else right now. I smiled, warmth flooding me. Not just because of his words, but because of the lesson I had learned. True power didn't come from perfection, it came from effort, resilience, and refusing to let humiliation define you. And that lesson wasn't just for Jake's friends. It was for me. Every glance, every judgment, every whispered assumption from that first dinner, it fueled me, shaped me, made me stronger. Over the next few weeks, the ripple effect continued. Jake's friends treated me differently, more respect, more admiration, subtle acknowledgments of my growth. But more importantly, I noticed a shift in myself. I held my head higher, spoke with more confidence, and approached life with a new sense of agency. One afternoon, while Jake was at work, I looked around the apartment, the calm and order reflecting the person I had become. The kitchen was no longer a battlefield. It was a stage, and I was the performer in control, commanding attention, respect, and admiration with ease. I realized then that the true revenge wasn't about making anyone else feel small. It was about claiming my own space, asserting my own power, and proving to myself that I could rise above embarrassment and judgment. When Jake returned that evening, he immediately noticed the subtle changes, the way I moved, the calm precision in my actions, the quiet confidence in my smile. You've changed, he said softly, voice full of pride and admiration. I replied. And it was the truth, not just in the kitchen, but in every aspect of my life. I had discovered a strength I hadn't known existed, and no one could take that away from me. The story of that disastrous dinner and the triumph that followed became more than just a personal victory. It became a symbol, a reminder that resilience, effort, and self-belief could turn humiliation into power. And as I sat with Jake, sipping wine and reflecting on the journey, I realized one more thing: true love wasn't about perfection. It was about partnership, support, and sharing strength in moments of chaos. I had learned, through fire, smoke, and a little clever revenge, that love and respect were earned not through flawless performance, but through courage, persistence, and heart. And with that knowledge, I knew I was ready for anything life or anyone threw my way. The apartment was quiet that night, the city lights twinkling through the windows, like a soft celebration of everything I had accomplished. I stood in the kitchen, surveying the clean counters, the neatly stacked dishes, and the faint lingering aroma of last night's dinner. It was a stark contrast to the chaos and smoke that had defined the first disaster, and I felt a quiet sense of pride. Jake walked in, leaning casually against the doorway, a soft smile playing on his lips. "You've really transformed this place," he said. "And yourself, too." I laughed softly, the sound filled with both relief and triumph. "It's been a journey," I admitted. "Not just with the cooking or the dinners, but with me." I realized I could rise above embarrassment, beyond what people expect of me, and really take control. He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around me. "Emily, I've always believed in you, but seeing you like this, it's incredible. I don't think I've ever been prouder." I smiled, resting my head against his chest. "Thanks." It wasn't just about proving everyone else wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could, and it was true. The first dinner, the chaos, the smoke, the burnt pasta had all been humiliating in the moment, but it had lit a fire inside me. It had pushed me to discover strength, creativity, and resilience I hadn't tapped into before. And now, that fire was mine, fully. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle changes all around. Jake's friends treated me with newfound respect, not just because I had cooked well, but because I had claimed my space, my confidence, and my voice. They realized, finally, that the woman they had once underestimated was not only capable but unstoppable. But the greatest change was in me. I walked taller, spoke with authority, and faced challenges without fear of embarrassment. I had learned that humiliation wasn't permanent, it was temporary, a stepping stone to growth, if you had the courage to turn it into fuel. Jake and I often reminisced about that first dinner, laughing over the smoke, the burnt vegetables, and my panicked expressions. But the laughter was sweeter now, infused with the pride of how far I had come. One evening, as we sat together, I realized something profound. True love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about flawlessly prepared meals or impressing friends. It was about partnership, support, and believing in each other through chaos and failure. Jake squeezed my hand. "You know," he said, "I always knew you had it in you. But seeing you claim it, that's something else entirely." I smiled, feeling warmth and strength radiating through me. "I guess sometimes it takes a little disaster to show your true power," and in that moment, I knew I had transformed. The Emily who panicked, who hid from judgment, who feared embarrassment, that Emily no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, braver, and unstoppable. The lesson was clear: life will throw smoke, chaos, and judgment your way. But with resilience, determination, and a little clever planning, you can rise above it. You can reclaim your space, your respect, and even a sense of triumph. As Jake and I toasted quietly to our small victory, the real one being personal growth and partnership, I realized that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges, more moments to rise, but now I knew I was ready. I was capable. I was unstoppable. And with that knowledge, I embraced the quiet satisfaction of victory, not over anyone else, but over fear, embarrassment, and self-doubt, because the real revenge had been mine all along.